Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BuzzOnEarth podcast. After a decent amount of time spent researching, we are finally back with a new edition of our Sustainability News podcast. In this episode, we talk about farming without bees and shy trees that practice social distancing. We have some news on the forest fire in the icy tundra of Siberia, that's true, and why 2020 is our last and best chance to save the oceans. We will also try to answer the questions how much plastic we are eating every day, and also how long the good effects of the pandemic on our environment will last. But to begin with, let me give you a quick recap of what we left you with in our last podcast. In our last episode, we left you with the question, how come women are amongst the largest affected groups when it comes to any natural disaster? The logic behind this lies in relativism or dependency. It is obvious that someone who is well equipped to handle crises usually minimizes the uncertainties and in turn gets less affected by it. So whenever a disaster strikes, it is usually the women who are the most vulnerable because they do not have the resources to cope with it. Genetically speaking as well, a man is also better equipped to handle the harshness of the environment. Even if you keep that aside, men are more adept at making quick decisions as compared to women, who are believed to be better thinkers, probably, and better decision makers in the long run. Taking advantage of this trait of women, a study in Honduras put the women of La Masica village in charge of disaster management, in place of the usual team of men, who were instead asked to make the locality ready to face the disaster. So the gender roles were reversed. Not surprisingly, La Masica was the only village that reported 0 deaths during 1998 Hurricane Mitch. So you see, role reversal can be a really good thing. The next item on this month's news menu is a moral dilemma. While researching, I came across an article which said scientists have developed ways in which agriculture can be saved even if all the bees died. Researchers have found that soap bubbles can carry pollen grains and deposit them on flowers. By mounting bubble makers or mini drones, or bee bots, if you will, scientists managed to pollinate a pear orchard recently. Now it's good for science and all its advancements, but seriously, have we seriously come to a situation that we already are looking for ways to save ourselves from the apocalypse that is a result of our own greed? Well, if I have to be honest here, on one hand, I really want to appreciate this groundbreaking innovation about replacing bees with the level of efficiency that they have, which is simply impossible. However, the very fact that the thought behind it is borderline nefarious, that is what is making me uncomfortable. This is definitely a big dilemma for me. And don't forget, scientists who conducted this bubble experiment also noted that actual bees are far more effective at pollinating plants and sustaining agriculture. So we must be very serious about protecting bees. What do you guys have to say about this? Do leave your comments below. This podcast so far is getting unique at multiple levels. Let us take the case of our shy trees, for instance. I don't want to compare humans with trees, given that trees are generally kinder than human beings. But did you know that trees practice social distancing too? Many forest canopies, for instance, maintain mysterious gaps. These are called crown shyness, that helps them to keep sharing resources, but even while keeping a safe distance too. This phenomenon was first discovered in 1982 by biologist Francis Jack Putz, who happened to stray into a knot of black mangrove trees seeking some relief from the afternoon heat for his nap. And He was working in Costa Rica's Guanacaste National Park then. Well, as he lay down for his afternoon siesta and looked at the sky before finally giving into his slumber, he was amazed. Woods noted that the constant clawing of the limbs of the neighboring trees had resulted in certain parts of the affected trees not growing in that direction at all. Well, not that we can blame the poor trees for it. No one wants to be a near troublemaker. I mean, you could fight back too, but trees are usually grounded, so it is hard for them to retaliate. That being said, let's discuss something even more serious. We usually say set the water on fire in the context of either petroleum products or even when we have to appreciate super performance or achievement. Sadly, in the case of Siberia's tundra, it wasn't either. Coming up in our next news item is this. Climate change can have some really serious consequences. We talk about melting of the glaciers, the polar ice caps being lost, the world being submerged underwater, and sadly now it seems that all of that isn't as far. For months, Siberia has been experiencing extreme heat conditions due to a combination of persisting sunny weather and human-caused climate change. In addition to producing Arctic temperatures that cracked 100 degrees in June 2020, the heat was fueled as an enormous outbreak of wildfires, including fires on tundra. This rash of fires on landscapes that are typically too cold, wet, and icy to burn is raising alarms for ecologists and climate scientists who fear that it is yet another sign that the Arctic is undergoing rapid changes that could tip off a cascade of consequences, both local and global. The problem lies in the fact that if this phenomenon becomes a regular occurrence on Siberia's thawing tundra, it could dramatically reshape entire ecosystems, causing new species to take over and perhaps priming the land for more fires. The blazes themselves could have also exacerbated global warming by now, by burning deep into the soil and releasing carbon that has accumulated as frozen organic matter over hundreds of years. And since now we have already talked about the ice part of the climate change, let's look at another serious problem that is plaguing our oceans. Stay tuned. We human beings owe our life to the sea. 4 in 10 humans rely on the ocean for food. Marine life produces 70% of our oxygen, and 90% of global goods travel via shipping lanes. We turn to the sea for solace. Ocean-based tourism in the US alone is worth $124 billion a year, as well as for medical advancement. For instance, did you know that an enzyme used for COVID-19 testing was originally sourced from bacteria found in the ocean's hydrothermal vents? The ocean also acts as a giant planetary air conditioner. Over the past century, the ocean has absorbed 93% of the heat trapped in the atmosphere by greenhouse gas emissions. It's true that if all that heat hadn't been taken up by the ocean, we'd all be living in Death Valley living conditions by now. But we humans have been squeezing the life out of the sea. We dump 8 million tons of waste into the ocean a year, in addition to agricultural and industrial runoffs that poisons coastal areas. And at the rate we are harvesting fish, by 2050 there will likely be more plastic than fish in the oceans. And this year, 2020, was supposed to be the year to start reversing all of those. A series of international policy meetings this year was meant to set global targets for managing fish population, restoring biodiversity, and controlling pollution. But the coronavirus pandemic put all those talks on hold. Nonetheless, environmentalists, scientists, policymakers, and ocean advocates are working desperately to keep the momentum going. They are aware, and we should all be aware, that this might be the last best chance they have and we have to reverse the tide. As they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. Switching topics now, did you know that this month is supposed to be No Plastic July? #NoPlasticJuly? Yes. Let us see how well we have been faring on that front. So let's take a look. Do you know how much plastic we are eating every day? It's around 5 grams of plastic, which is the equivalent of the weight of a credit card every week. Or a plastic hanger a month, just imagine. According to the World Wildlife Fund website, yourplasticdiet.org, you could be consuming over 21 grams a month or 250 grams a year. 8 million tons of plastic end up in the ocean every year. They break down into tiny bits called microplastics, small enough to enter our food chain, along with other types of microplastics like those that are released when we wash our clothes. So what can we do about it? While saying no to straws and bringing along a reusable bag are great first steps, which you must absolutely do. But it's the governments and the businesses who need to solve this as well. There have been multiple reports in the media on the microplastics we are ingesting through our food, like shellfish, honey, and salt, and drinks like bottled water, tapped water, and even beer, and even the air we breathe. And as you know, the turtles are still dying, and so are the marine birds. The other day, I just saw a cow munch on a plastic bag. She was actually munching on the food that was in it, but the plastic is something we gave her for free. That reminded me of the gruesome incident, you must have heard of this as well, in which some of our fellow humans fed a firecracker to a pregnant elephant, and to fatal consequences. Sometimes I find it really hard to understand. When are we going to learn after all? Okay, from the perils of plastic to the platitudes of pollution. All the happiness that we were surrounding ourselves with because COVID had shut us down is proving to be short-lived. Industries will soon come back with full force. China's manufacturing sector has already surpassed its allotted carbon credit by a huge margin. So where are we on the carbon emission front? Find out next in this news item. How long will the good effects of the pandemic on our environment last? With the world locked down, carbon emissions did plummet because of reduced traffic and reduced power usage and low industrial production. As a result, global carbon emissions are projected to be 7% less in 2020 than it was in 2019. This is for the first time in more than 10 years. But if you thought that such dips have any lasting effect on climate change, you are probably wrong. If we go back in history, carbon emissions dropped 26% during the Great Depression, 17% in the aftermath of the World War II, and 3% after the fall of the Soviet Union, for example, in 1991. But after each of these drops, the world has always produced more CO2 than before. So there's no reason to rejoice or be complacent. Because even if we were to maintain this level of reduced carbon emissions, thanks to the lockdown or slowdown in the economy, we would still need to reduce emissions by 50% by the year 2030. That is, if we want to stop global temperatures from rising to levels which scientists believe is necessary to avert some of the worst impacts of climate change. So folks, we have come to the end of this month's podcast. In the end, is the world really such a bad place? Have we really stooped so low that we are about to hit the rock bottom? I'll leave you with this thought. But before I say goodbye, did you hear about the tree which grows at the bottom of the world? That would make for an interesting fact, right? So see you next month with more on that and more such thought-provoking and eye-opening news from the natural world. Till then, this is Shubhodas on behalf of the BuzzOnEarth team saying goodbye.